I'm Bailey.
And I'm Melissa.
And we are doing our project on international student services. Okay, so some common responsibilities of the people who work in international student services. One would be orientations, obviously when students first arrive to campus. But that includes like what you normally think is orientation, but it often includes extra things like going with them to help to pick up furniture. You know, those little things where they don't have their, dad with the truck to help them move. So they help in those areas too. And then there's also some places are switching more to a instead of just a week-long orientation when they get there. Instead, some are starting to do more of a long-term orientation. So that's one thing that's happening in some places. Another huge part is visa compliance and immigration regulations, or SEVIS. SEVIS stands for Student and Exchange Visitor Program, and those are just all the laws that they have to abide by. And it's really important that they stay up to date on them because they're constantly changing, so that's kind of a big thing they have to do. And that's something that's become more important in recent years, like specifically after 9/11 and things like that. That's become a bigger component. And then they have programming for both international and domestic students on campus. So like at Concordia, for example, they have International Student Coffee Hour. It's a chance for international students to interact with faculty and staff in a really casual way. And then they also do special things, like they recently at Concordia had celebrated Saudi National Day, and so there are a lot of Saudi Arabian students there, and so they had a big celebration where they just were able to share their culture with the rest of campus. And then advising international students, so just any questions they have really, they'll refer them to other offices as well, like academic advising with specific questions, but they'll help them in any concerns they have, adjusting to culture, some of the broader academic requirements. I know Tom, like one of the people I interviewed at Concordia, he talked about students not really understanding liberal arts, that idea of liberal arts, so kind of telling, educating them on what that means and why it's important, and just any general issues they have. And there's frequent collaboration with a lot of other departments. Basically, so any department that interacts with students or international students, they work with. It's kind of just they bridge the gap between the students and the department. So it's pretty much any department on campus, really. And sometimes there's also some recruitment involved, but that depends on the institution. I think at a lot of the bigger institutions, they don't really have to do that. There are other people for that. But at Concordia, Tom, for example, he does a little bit of that, so I think that can vary.
So we're going to take a moment, and what do you think are main challenges for international students? Just talk to someone nearby. We'll take about a minute.
Depending on their language abilities, if maybe they're comprehending, or if they have complete comprehension of what's going on around them or what's even being required of them.
I think even the structure of universities here is just kind of confusing as well. Like maybe the idea of student affairs is just absolutely a foreign idea, and trying to navigate that system where we're trying to have students make their own personal decisions and choices, and it's like, what do I do? And the language barrier.
Yeah, I think the language barrier can not only affect sort of teaching in the classroom, but also I've talked to international students who really feel isolated from their peers when it's sort of like, okay, get into groups, or they aren't students don't gravitate to them because there's a language barrier, or they assume there is, or whatever. So it's a belonging, feeling of belonging.
Yeah. So we're going to take comments from 3 people. If you want to raise your hands, what you guys came up with. Kelly?
Stephanie made a good point that I didn't think about. She said that pop culture can be hard to get used to here if you don't get those connections, which is kind of.
I think it's easy to assume that people may have a language barrier issue, which is true. But even if your English is perfect, if you're not a person.
Mm-hmm. Yes, true. And then Bridget?
Like letting your personality shine through. Like you might be able to ask for like a loaf of bread, but you can't like say puns and do jokes and things that express your personality.
Yep. And one more? Anyone else want to share?
We talked a little bit about just like really
really simple things, like even personal space. I had dealt with a lot of Chinese students at my undergrad, and their personal space bubble in China is a lot smaller
Yeah.
than it is here. So
Yes, good.
it was just, that was interesting.
Okay, so those are all things that are challenges. One of the first things that we came up with and was consistent through our research and interviews is feelings of belonging on campus. Just integrating with all the other students who are domestic and already living there, from the area, things like that. Language barriers, which Bridget talked about, actually a lot of you guys talked about. So language barriers is also integrated, like when you're in your classes, whether or not your instructors are lenient. And one obstacle that came up is that instructors rely on assignments, and that's a lot of writing assignments, and it's better if they can mix it up and take grades from different areas. And then culture shock. So we talked about students adjusting to the liberal American culture, and then also being co-ed. That's a challenge for some students. So for finance, one thing that comes up is the source of funding can be disrupted for students, whether or not the person who was paying for their education back home passed away, or they don't have the money anymore. That could be a challenge. Also, difficulties with employment. Finding employment outside of campus is difficult because a lot of employers don't even want to deal with visa regulations and things like that. We also talked about the adjusting to the American educational system. Some students have, international students have issues with challenging instructors and just being interactive and communicating. Also with critical thinking, and plagiarism came up a lot in our research too. Some students are used to just copy and pasting and not realizing how important it is for us to not be plagiarizing.
One article I saw said something about the students thought of it as respectful. We call it cheating. So I thought that was interesting.
And then also compliance with CBIS, so we talked about that before, but there was very strict regulations, and one thing that comes up is that the regulations aren't very flexible. And we have a quote from Tom Allen from Concordia, and he said, "What sticks with you is when difficult student situations arise and laws are stacked against them. You need to be the voice of regulations when you want to be the voice for the students." So sometimes in these positions, the student affairs professional feels torn between the students and the rules that they have to follow.
Okay. So in your opinion, what do you think are international students least satisfied with on campus?
So if someone wants to shout out an idea.
Just what would be your first thought?
Activities on campus. Instructors.
Okay, so as far, what we came up with was more job opportunities, especially like when you graduate too, it can be difficult finding jobs outside of the campus and things like that.
Yeah, there's actually a big study done by NAPSA, which is one of the professional organizations in your handout, where they kind of polled institutions about what do you think is the biggest thing that makes international students leave, and they all said it was more academic reasons. And that when the students were polled, they all said financial reasons, whether it was employment or scholarships or things like that.
And then just shout out who thinks where are retention rates higher, international or domestic students? International. From what we found is more than 60% of the schools surveyed in one of our articles said international students. And also with the rise of international students, we have 40% more international students than we did a decade ago.
Why might that be the retention higher for international students? Did the article explain why?
Further learning opportunity.
And it's also, I think, for domestic students, it's easier to transfer to other institutions rather than international. Because they know the area, it's more accessible to them.
And there could be something too where legally they're here to study. So if they drop out, they have to leave.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking, is it's a different kind of investment. You move
Yeah.
somewhere, you're in it, you're gonna stick with it.
Yeah.
Probably. Sorry,
Okay.
go ahead.
So, and now we just have a few examples of specific things that we found different colleges doing in our research. So one thing at the University of Dayton, they are they have these global success workshops, and the international students are led by peers, and they also have guest speakers, and they talk about reading and writing skills, how to write research papers, and then academic integrity, so dealing with plagiarism, and this is where that shift towards more long-term orientation is occurring, so they're not just, they get their orientation when they get here and then they're on their own. It's more over the course of the semester and the year.
And then the College of Worcester, they have a global engagement seminar, which is a 4-credit course, FOR credit course. And it's 1 semester and it's an elective. Students can take it to learn more about just being at the university, being in the United States. They learn about things like healthcare, what a liberal arts education is, and then they also talk about topics that affect them, like the policies and services that they have on campus.
Okay, and then in Oregon, there's the Chemeketa Community College, and they have a career planning course in which they learn a lot of skills for succeeding in college, and they learn about things like interviewing for jobs and resumes and things like that. And then holistic developmental advising, they talked about how international student services is just positioned really well, and so it's positioned, they can go there and they have access to the admissions people, the academic advising people, housing, language, learning the language, so it's kind of a one-stop shop, so it's kind of nice for them to get everything they need in one place.
Yeah, and for that, the director, they all report to the director of retention, which also affects them. And then we had Kent State, they have an integration committee that meets 3 times a semester, and it's professionals from all over the university. There's 30 people that meet, or representatives, and each one has their own responsibilities and departments that affect international students. So examples of that is one person met with regional transit and talked about like transportation and how to get cheaper bus passes and things like that. And then another person met with health insurance and to try to ease the process into students getting health insurance. The last one is the University of West Florida. They had different ideas. One thing is to have a taxi voucher program because they have an isolated campus and they want students to be able to get into downtown Pensacola. So they have a voucher program. Also, they encourage offices to offer more on-campus positions and internships for students because they have a difficult time getting jobs off campus. And then also they have a mentoring program which connects international and domestic students. This was common with a lot of schools. They use this and it's working. St. Thomas uses it as well.
Any questions? Yeah.
What was your favorite part? Like, what was something that stuck out to you the most? Like, of learning all of this, because all these areas are new to that.
As far as like the activity that I liked the most was meeting with the people I interviewed. But one thing I thought was I found really interesting was how the CVIS regulations have come about since 9/11. I didn't know that the terrorists were on expired, some of them were on expired student visas. So now they're very strict about that, and that changed things.
And I'd say definitely interviews were really interesting. I learned a lot from them. And again, the CVIS regulations, when we asked what's something that someone wouldn't normally think of when they think of this role, they all said the regulations and just how important that is, and they emphasized that's kind of a stressful part of their job because if they screw that up, that can have major implications both for the student and for the institution too. And then also just how the quote we included both on the PowerPoint and on your handout, really, it resonated with me, just where they want to be the voice for the students, but they have to be the voice for the regulations and having that inner battle constantly. Yeah.
I don't know, did you, okay, did you find information on like students after graduating as international students, like what % are like returning to where they were, like they're native to, or are they staying, or are colleges attempting to, or universities like attempting to keep students here in any ways?
Yeah, there's this OPT program, I guess, and it's where they are able to stay in the same metro area where they went to school to have jobs. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I found one resource that we could break it down by metropolitan areas, and so I found Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I know that it was the majority. It was more than half. So
We're staying, or?
We're staying
Okay.
and doing the OPT.
And Corinne?
What was the demographic of the people that were like,
directors of these international programs that you were interviewing?
So one was from MCAT, so it's a very small institution, arts
Sorry, I
institution.
mean like racially, ethnic, like the
Oh, okay.
cultural.
There's,
Right.
oh, you
Like
mean
the
just
people we
students in
interviewed.
general,
Yeah,
like
like
where
the-
they're coming from mainly?
No, like the directors of the
The people you
programs
interviewed?
They-
were-
were all
were
white.
They were all white.
And native to the
Native
United
to
States?
to the area too, I think. Oh, mine too.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Were they young?
Yeah. PD.
I don't know.
We were actually like friends,
From
and they
this
all
program?
just had branched out and gone to different areas.
They knew each other from this program in recent years. And then Tom, he's the director of International Student Services at Concordia. I mean, he's probably, I don't even know how old he is. Maybe 30s, 40s, early 40s. Yeah.
So one of the folks you interviewed talked about kind of the challenges of getting into this field. Can you say more about, like, I mean, they talked about kind of networking and kind of finding an in. Can
Yeah.
you talk more about what that theme
Yeah,
sounded
so
like?
it sounded like you really have to have some experience with international students, be interested in culture, show some interest by, I mean, even if you can't get a grad assistantship, getting like volunteering or something like that. It's, they also said it's good to go to the F1, there's, MIE offers an F1 visa
Workshops.
workshops.
Where you can go and learn all of the regulations and stuff, so even if you haven't had the full experience.
Yeah, and they said it's difficult to get a job without having any background with the F1 scholarship.
Yeah, so they're both of them, or I think all of our interviews kind of touched on how that's kind of frustrating. It's like, it's entry level, they want experience, but how do you get experience without having experience? And so they kind of, in one of my interviews, she said, another tip she gave was continue doing these information interviews. To just, if you're interested in an area that you want to apply for a job in, just go and talk to them, and then at least you, in an interview, you know some of the terms and you have demonstrated interest in it. So that's tough. Yeah.
Did they say anything about studying abroad as a professional, so you know how the feeling is as an international student? Because I know for
Yeah.
me, this is my dream functional area, like dream job. I've never studied abroad, and that's always been a question for me, like, because I can never say to a student, I know exactly where you're coming from. Did they say anything on that, like if study abroad correlates with that as a professional?
Everybody we talked to, well,
Yeah, they all said, when we asked why did you enter this field, they all thought back to their study abroad experience, so they all did study abroad. But they didn't give me the impression that it's needed. It's just
It was more just being exposed to diversity,
having
like putting yourself in
multicultural
that
competence,
position.
and they didn't specifically say that. They all did, but I don't think you have to.
And I believe it's very important to want to learn about each, like all the different types of cultures, because those students are going to be coming to you and they have very different issues. So,
Having a curiosity,
yeah, that's what resonated, like curiosity and being persistent.
and it's a lot of just empathy, and it's those skills that, you know, even if you haven't, I don't know, I mean, even if you haven't been in the exact situation, if you're good with empathy, if that's a strength of yours, I think that's what you need.
Yeah, and within this program, we are sort of developing more and more opportunities where you could have an abroad experience. So if that's something that you're interested in getting while you're here, not for a whole semester, of course, but there's a couple May term options and summer options. So if that's, I mean, we'll for sure get that information out. But just so you know, the opportunity is not lost.
Okay,